Do you see any effects directly to boys? Like, what does it? How does it? Would you say affects boys in the high school arena? So you're our high school expert tonight. So how would you say that this challenge that we're now facing directly affects boys?
Well, it
Any effects directly to boys?
there's an echo.
Sorry, I got it.
Oh no, it with it taken away from their routine. There's now a lot of time that if it's not being filled with instruction, there's a lot of time that they have nothing else to do. Um, you know, not only instruction for our boys, but a number of them are involved in extracurriculars. Um, and so that's even more time that they were utilizing or spending doing something productive. And you take those things away, um, and for a number of our young men that might be coming from the not so desirable situations in the home setting, that break away from their reality is now taken away.
Yeah, that's good. Good feedback. Anything else to share, Mr. Du Bois?
Um, I just a big kudos to our teaching staff. I think they've gone above and beyond and trying to reach our families and check on them. I mean, not just to see to it that they're doing work, but just to see how they're doing and connect them with whatever they may need during these times.
Absolutely. Great feedback. Thank you. Thank you again. I don't know which one of you gentlemen wants to go next, but feel free to jump in there about kind of how this is affecting the young men that you serve at your school. I do want to say before you go, we are our YouTube stream is live, so we are live on YouTube. So if there's anyone who joined us in that capacity, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We did have some challenges with our Facebook stream tonight, so we will get this restreamed to Facebook tomorrow. So if you joined via YouTube, thank you and welcome. So I'm not sure which one of you gentlemen kind of want to jump in there next and kind of talk about from your seat what you see, how this is affecting students overall, and then how is it affecting our young men.
I agree with Dwayne. That routine is that's huge for a lot of kids, and not having that really does affect probably their day to day a lot more than we even know. And then also in elementary school, we always joke about some of our worst cases always being at school. It's that safe haven for them. That's where they come to get just a little bit of peace, take them away from, I don't know, whatever's troubling them throughout their day to day at home or in their home environment. So again, not having that is probably, again, we can't even measure the effect that it's having on those type of kids.
That's so good. Thank you so much for bringing that up. I think that that's very valuable. That it is a joke that we do make as educators that the worst
Right.
kids, they don't miss a day. They
Right.
be there. They are there and they are there faithfully. They be there on time. They be
Yep.
there
Yep.
late.
Late.
The snow day. Don't nothing keep them from school. Fever. They be sitting in class sweating, 90-degree fever, and they're there. But those are the kids that need us the most. So I definitely thank you so much for that feedback. So Lorenzo, from an intervention specialist standpoint, what does the effect of kind of not now, as we know, school be closed for about 6 months? What does that look like for male students?
So I mean, as opposed to having to put and most of my students, they have an IEP, an individual education plan. So you're normally seeing them for 1, 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 hours a day. So not being able to put your hands on them and kind of talk to them and see how things are going, and um, just to be able to help them through. I know we're all sitting at home. A lot of us doing remote learning, and then some packets are being sent home, but not being able to help them navigate through those different situations. And not. I don't feel like we can. I don't even know if we can, but it's just not enough time with them now.
Yeah, that's real. I feel that. I appreciate that. Did you have anything else that you wanted to share for us tonight, sir?
Yeah, I just again, just it's that I can't stress enough that safe haven for them. Just being able to have those positive interactions with them. I think that's really what's troubling me in these times during this COVID-19 in this period. But again, for safety concerns, the right call was made as far as holding off on school for the rest of the year, though.
I think that I thank you so much for your feedback, Lorenzo. I think that I want to celebrate the governor. I think that he has taken a huge burden off of superintendents. I think that would be a incredibly difficult burden to bear as a superintendent to make that decision. So I'm very thankful that he went ahead and took that burden off of them. Because it looks different for big schools, small schools, unsuburban school. There's so many factors that go into it. So I'm just thankful for his leadership and jumping in and really being the voice and taking that weight off of them. I think that shows great leadership and sacrifice on his end. Mr. Antoine, let's hear from you. What do you have to say? How is this contributing to affecting students as a whole? So you're the principal at an elementary school, and I think that I'm so glad you're here tonight because as we were talking for a second earlier, you have a high amount of English learning students. So the challenge is even greater for your students. So kind of talk to us about that, and then we'll kind of hone into how you see it affecting your young men.
Yeah, well, first of all, let me say, I think it is the right call to close. We got to make sure that everyone's safe beyond just the building. We're talking about our families. So it's definitely the right call. It's so huge. I mean, you're talking about just on a normal day, we're trying to communicate with these English language learners. So thankfully, I have the BOM ESL team in my building. So they really help bridge those gaps. So just being able to communicate with them has been great. But, like they were saying, that safe haven is gone. I'm just going back to those troubled kids, as Black males, and I'm sure we're going to get to this later, but we're like the ones who, we're checking in on them. Most of the time when there's troublesome kids, they get sent to the Black males in the building so we can kind of wrap our arms around them. So I'm just thinking about those kids and just not being able to physically touch them and just make sure is everything okay, checking in on them from day to day, and just, being there to be that support system for them is critical. So, this is definitely going to affect them. What we say we'll be out about 6 months when we get back. So that's a long time without that structure of school. That's a long time. So.
Yeah. And you kind of spoke to it a little bit. So how do you see that affects, young men, especially who we'll talk about it later, but are some of the most marginalized students in schools? How does that affect them? How does this affect them?
Yeah, just, that structure, someone been there to reassure them. Can you guys hear me? I think it froze.
You're good. We can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, just being able to reassure them that everything is good, kind of give them that feedback. I think they're missing that. So I think in, those sports, so we're out of spring sports now or those extracurricular activities. All that stuff plays a role in that. And I'm just thinking about even our athletes, AAU ball, baseball, track. It's definitely going to affect them not having that structure in their lives and that teaching outside of the classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, gentlemen. All had great feedback to that question. Um, so let's kind of fast forward. Hopefully in August we are kind of back to normalcy. I know that there's been conversation and talks about what the beginning of the school year looks like. What can community organizations, so organizations like Forever Kings, the Boys and Girls Club, CRC, those are obviously going to be more vital than what they were in March. So how can those organizations best support your students, support young men who now we know will miss 6 months of school. So we know of the achievement gap. So at this point, it's just widened because for some of them, they're gonna have no instruction, no learning, no brain. I don't want to say no brain activity, but no cognitive, development for 6 months. It's a very large time. We already know the research behind summer learning loss. So we just got an extra 3 months of summer. So what does that look like in August would kind of be the first part of the questions, and then what can we do to support? So I don't know who wants to start, but what do you all feel like that's going to look like in August when we return to hopefully some kind of normal, and how do we support young men? Sorry, I'll mute you. There you go. You good?
Say the most important thing is to get those relationships reestablished. Kids know when you're being real and when you're not, and that's the reality of it. When you your authentic self and they know you love them, they will run through a wall for you. So before we can try to bridge any learning loss and we try to make up lost time, they have to know that we are there for them and that we care about them as individuals. So we're already working on a plan of how we can have that emotional support for students when they get back. And then we'll worry about that instructional stuff and as the year goes on. But I think when we get back in August, we gotta work hard to reestablish those relationships with those students.
I think that's so good. I'm glad that you said that. I think that that's very important, is that right now, above all else, I think the most important things is supporting kids' mental health and their emotional health and just connecting with them. And if they aren't learning or they aren't getting in that Zoom, just knowing that they're okay. I think for my personal opinion, I'm no expert, no education guru, but I do think that right now that's good enough. That just has to be good enough. So great feedback. Lorenzo, you have any thoughts surrounding that? Kind of what does August look like? How do we prepare for it, and how do organizations like myself, the Boys and Girls Club, CRC, all of those places, how do they support the students that you serve, especially the young men?
Yeah, I agree with Antoine. That's definitely got to build those relationships. And the good thing is that it's going to be at a natural time where we do a lot of that stuff in August. So I know principals always emphasize making sure you build relationships, make sure you do routines, build those routines all through this first quarter type of thing. And again, it might take a little bit longer because of the lag time or the time off, but it's going to be at a natural time where we're already doing those type of things. We're just going to have to double down on those things. And that's what Forever Kings, and again, I didn't know much about the organization until you contacted me a couple of weeks ago. Seems like that's what you guys are doing, man. You're present, you're available, you're giving them something to do. And that's what those organizations, that's what we're going to look for those organizations to do with our young men.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And that is absolutely what we focus on, is that social emotional connection, and that kids don't care what you know until they know that you care. And I mean, I've mentored young men for 10 years, and I've seen some of the hardest bring their walls and their barriers down, because I show up consistently, I'm there, and I'm constant. I challenge them, I push them, and just really hold them accountable. But most of all, I love them. Love you on your good days, and I love you on your bad days. So I 100% agree that that's going to be super important. Mr. Du Bois, so you see high schoolers, so I would definitely love to hear kind of your perspective about the high schoolers, especially the juniors. So if you could kind of speak to juniors who just kind of had an abrupt transition, and even the seniors that are graduating. So we have a lot of young men who just may be the first person to graduate in their entire family, which is huge, right? And who aren't going to get to experience that. So I would love to hear you kind of speak to that. What can we do? What will need to be done? How do we validate? How do we really support them after this is all said and done?
Well, there's a lot. There's a lot to this question. And I think there's a lot to the answer. Well, first and foremost, Lorenzo and Antoine hit the nail on the head. Speaking to the relationship piece. This is a traumatic experience, and not just having the rest of senior year taken away. If you're talking about a senior student, but in many of our students' homes, this is affecting their families financially. And so we're talking about a real traumatic experience. And so when this is all said and done, these families are going to be left to pick up the pieces. And so there's going to need to be supports in place for the students and the families as they try to get back to some sense of normalcy upon school starting back up. But speaking to school starting back up, we don't know what the new normal is going to look like. And so there's going to need to be supports for students transitioning into what this new normal is. And there's going to need to be understanding on the parts of all the adults who work with our students and trying to adjust to the new normal, whatever the new normal looks like. If you think about the difficulty that we all have with change, how much worse or how much more understanding are we going to need to have with these young people who may not have as much experience dealing with change. And so there's going to need to be supports along those lines. Speaking specifically to the seniors, we know they're missing out on prom in most cases. They're missing out on the graduation ceremony, getting and signing yearbooks, all those end of the year activities, senior awards day, these things that not just the students look forward to, but the families look forward to. And so, being empathetic and, being creative and finding ways to acknowledge and validate the students is going to be something that's crucial. I leaving out of my house a couple hours ago to go pick up some groceries. We saw a family who lived up the street. Somebody in their household had a birthday. So there was a short parade of cars coming down the street, balloons out, blowing their horns. But that's, that was something simple, but I'm sure it made the day of that young person up there, who probably needed to be validated and have a break from the monotony of being in the house all day. So I just think we're gonna have to be creative and open-minded and acknowledging those who've missed out on some things, but also for the rising juniors, they're probably going to want some reassurance that things are going to be okay. They're going to want to know, are their extracurriculars going to be affected? Are they going to have a graduation? And so I know right now the district, our school district is in the process of planning a virtual graduation for our current seniors, but also when we are able to get back in the physical building to possibly in August have a physical celebration where students and people can be there in person. So hopefully that can happen.
Yeah, Thank you so much for that. Great feedback, great thoughts. I definitely think that that's important, that students are going to need to be reassured, especially our young men. And I do not by any means want to dismiss our young lady, our black and brown young ladies, but I do, we do serve young men, and I do just want to say that school is often the last thing that they have, their last hope. Like that's that football field, that basketball, like that's it for them. Like they don't have anything else to hold on to. So I'm glad that you brought that up, Mr. Du Bois, about the importance of us helping to create that hope for them and assure them that, I mean, for some of them, that's how they make it out the hood, right? Like that's their one shot. They know that they're not the best academic students, so the best they can do is get on that field and ball out, and that's their one shot. So I definitely think that we have to be hypersensitive to that. So I appreciate you bringing that up. So we are going to switch gears just a little bit. We wanted to make sure that we were talked about the COVID-19 as a pressing issue. So we're gonna kind of go back to a little general questions and kind of talk about Black boys in education. So what would each of you say that the greatest challenge that boys of color, so when we say boys of colors, we mean Hispanic, Mexican, everything with some color goes into that category, right? So what would you say, Mr. Lewis, from your perspective, the greatest challenge, the greatest adversity at school that young men face? I always say that, unfortunately, I tell our boys in our program, like, you have 3 strikes against you when you wake up, right? So after they've put their feet on the ground, after being Black, being male, and most of our young men are big, they're bulky, they're strong, they look older than they really are. I know my little brother, who's 16, gets mistaken for 20, 23. I think somebody said, like, was he 25 or 27 last week? I'm like, he's 16. He can't even take a shit. He can't even wipe himself, right? Like he can't even, like,
Right.
he can't, what you talking about? 20? Like, no. He ain't got no real job, like, right? But unfortunately, our boys look big, they look older, they look threatening. So they wake up and put their feet on the ground and have 3 strikes against them, and then they get to school. So talk about what happens when they get there.
I think you kind of said it. They're misunderstood. That's the biggest challenge. I try to preach about the culture, how we treat everybody with kindness. And so I'm gonna just throw a general example. Some adult may come at a Black boy all types of crazy. They respond, and now they want this Black boy sent to you, or they're the problem. And I just think that they're just the biggest thing is they're misunderstood. And oftentimes, like I try to teach my boys, it's not what you say, it's how you're communicating. So I've been trying to teach my kids of how to communicate when you're upset. It's okay to walk away. All right. I'd rather you walk away than you just say something or do something that you're going to regret, or that's going to cost you. And this is not about a school consequence. This is a life lesson.
Yeah.
So teaching them how to manage that anger, because as Black men, once we get angry, all of a sudden, we're the problem. Let's call the police. We're an issue. So just teaching them this is the reality of life. Like you said, there's 3 strikes against you when you wake up. You're a Black man. All right. So you have to learn how to be better than, and how to exceed, and break down those stereotypes that people have of you. So I would say the biggest challenge is we are and they are just misunderstood.
Absolutely. Last week, if you didn't tune in, we had Michael Johnson on the call, and he talked about, very similar to what you're talking about, social worker and therapist talked about how we are mistaking hypersensitivity. So where boys won't sit down, or they're constantly moving, they're constantly looking around, they're constantly walking around. We're mistaking that for ADHD when it's really trauma. So really, they live in these war zones and in these difficult environments and circumstances, and we expect them to come to school and forget that.
Mhm.
And I'm gonna just leave that alone, because I have lots of feedbacks as that. So thank you so much for that. We'll go to Mr. Du Bois talked to us in high school. So they have made it to ninth grade, which is no longer a given. So the trend used to be that dropout kind of started at that 10th, ninth, end of ninth, middle of ninth, 10th grade, 11th grade. But now we're seeing that they're not even, young boys are not even making it that far, that seventh and eighth grade middle school holding power, like the fact that we had to create a whole name for something, shows that there's a problem. So talk to that. So they get to school, and what are they up against in the school?
I'm glad you mentioned that point about middle school as well. We're a 7 through 12 building, and it's an issue all the way. It's an issue all the way through. What I think the biggest issue facing our young men of color is bias. And the thing about bias is we all have it. Every one of us is looking at life through our own personal lens. And so we come with our own knowledge and backgrounds, and the way we act to certain things is shaped a lot by our own personal experiences or education or lack of education. And the key to bias is that we gotta recognize that, one, we all have it, but
all have it.
yes. And what do we do to try to counter it? Withrow is a predominantly Black student population. Well, predominantly Black and international students. So all of our students, just about, are students of color. But if you look at a lot of teaching staffs around the nation, a lot of teaching staffs don't match the population of the students. And this goes beyond just color. I mean, we talk social economic status and other various demographics. But when the teaching staff does not come from the background of the students, then there is a potential there for the bias to become a bad thing. And so, what I think needs to happen, is a willingness on the part of those of us who are in charge to be understanding of where our student populations are coming from, and try to meet them where they are and take them where they need to be educationally.
That's good. That's so good. Everybody has bias. Whether you want to admit it, recognize it, own it or not, you absolutely do have bias. And I think that we have for too long formed education policies and reforms and all of those things based on people who have extreme biases, which has resulted in the achievement gap, ensoulment, the school to prison pipeline, and just all of those things. When you really boil them down to, it boils down to bias, and it's really boiled down to what someone perceives that student to be. I know Dwayne and I work together at a school, and I love his team. I can talk about them now. They would be mad at me because I would see a student one way, not necessarily Dwayne, but mad at me because I see a student one way and they see something totally different, right? So all of those things are what I think contribute to how we get to where we get. So thank you so much for sharing.
If I may, Jordan,
yeah.
A specific example that you just reminded me of. When we come from different backgrounds, and we see things different culturally, and so I don't know if you remember this. Alicia is the one tells me, because she's the one that gets the call about our son and he's in trouble. Elijah, he's the most friendly, outgoing. All he wants to do is make friends. I mean, even on the sports field, I'm trying to get him to be mean and competitive. He wants to make friends. There's not a malicious bone in his body. And so, Alicia tells me that, he's in trouble, and what he's in trouble for was apparently he was grabbing his crotch and gyrating while on the playground. Now, I heard that immediately and thought, oh, he was doing the Michael Jackson. Alicia thought the same thing. And he grew up a big fan of Michael Jackson from a young age. So, you know, the people in charge didn't see it, that they didn't even connect the dots.
Yeah.
But there's an example of, you know, being of a young black child, a young black boy being misunderstood, and it possibly leading to trouble. And if, you know, in his situation, if he didn't have parents that were able to, you know, advocate for him, you know, it could have resulted in something, you know, disastrous. And we were concerned the whole time, particularly with him, that those misunderstandings would cause him to have a jaded attitude towards school. And he has such a joyous spirit.
Yeah.
And so, and, you know, and a lot of our black boys, I mean, this is what I see at the high school level. This is what not just the black boys, I mean, but their families also. By the time these kids get to the high school level with me, they're already distrustful of those of us that are in charge, because that's been their experience all the way up.
Yeah, that's good. That's so good. I think that it starts with, for this purpose of this conversation, it starts at Mr. Lewis's school, at Antoine's school. It starts there, and if they have bad experiences or experiences that you know, are traumatic, that produces a level of distrust for them. I tell my boys the story all the time where I was working for an organization, and we were sitting at the round table in the conference room. And anyone who knows me and knows me, Dwayne, you can attest to this. I have to move, so I got to fidget. I got to play with something. I can't sit still, right? So we had been in this meeting for like 2.5 hours at this point. So I kind of slouch my body in my chair just to move for a second. And the leader of that organization felt that was the most disrespectful thing in the world, and he slanders me in front of the whole room of people. And from that moment on, I no longer trusted that environment. No longer. I was uncomfortable. I didn't speak. I didn't share ideas. So I can't imagine what that does to, you know, 9 and 10-year-old boys, because I was an adult and, you know, had kind of overcome a lot of things, but that made me no longer trust that environment. And that same thing kind of happens in our classrooms with our boys, where they're like, "Nah, forget this. I trusted y'all once and y'all messed it up." So definitely great points. Mr. Lorenzo, you're up. What you got?
They pretty much hit the nail on the head. I mean, there's the misunderstanding between staff and students. I mean, you got staff population not being representative of the population that they're teaching. And then I'll just add that a lot of times the young men, the school system wasn't really set up for our young men to be successful. And what I mean by that is that
good tonight, sir.
So I mean, but we know what are best practice, what are best situations for young men to learn in, and it's just not being. I mean, small group settings, hands-on learning, things like that.
Boys don't sit still.
Yep.
Stop writing kids up, boys up, because they won't sit down. They don't. They don't sit still. They loud. They gon' fart. One teacher at a school I was working at was put the kid out because he farted. He a boy.
Right. Right.
That's what they do. They nasty.
Yeah, and you just don't see it enough. And I'm sure Antoine can talk about it in his elementary school, but you just don't see it enough across the board. There are instances where it's happening, but it's just not enough across the board. And it needs to be happening all the way through elementary, all the way through middle school, going into high school. They took out, the shop and, the woodworking and all that other stuff that would have just got people just busy and moving and things like that, that it's just not there anymore for them.
Yeah, that's so good. I think that I actually graduated from vocational school. I am an advocate, a high advocate for vocational school. I think that we need more of them.
Right.
I was a horrible student. Funny, right? I run a whole organization, but I got D's and F's in school. Like I was terrible. And I went to Great Oaks and I got straight A's and was the top of my class and did the senior speech and like total difference because I got to do what I love for half the day. So you just need me to go to these 2 classes, bust these work down, got you. And then I get to go do what I love. I mean, literally, I have shown people using my own report cards the fruit of vocational school. So I'm 100% with you that I think the traditional classroom setting just does not work for the average young boy.
It's a beautiful thing. You can see kids in their environment where they excel and succeed. And everybody doesn't jive well in the same situation. So yeah, I'm a big advocate as well of vocations and offering a pathway for students to get certifications.
Yeah. So, but kind of before we move to the next question, because it kind of goes into what we were just talking about with that limited visibility, but I wanted to ask you, Dwayne and Antoine, what do you all see as the challenge? So I work in a position that I'm kind of like in between administrators, teachers, and kids, right? So I sometimes see the teacher's perspective and 92% of the time I don't agree with it. And that goes for girls and boys. So then the ISS person, the disciplinarian, whoever kind of ends up having to issue that discipline, the administrators, what is that challenge of when you have something come across your desk that you don't agree with and you get the young man, you see his potential. Antoine over there laughing, y'all, if y'all can't see him, he's like of supporting your teacher, right? So you want to be, as a leader, you want to be supportive to your teacher, but you also like, oh man, not like in Dwayne's case, if that wasn't his son, like not Elijah, like not, come on now, he didn't mean it. That ain't really what that was. Like you tripped. So what is that balance and how is it difficult for you all as administrators?
Wow, you know what? What my first few days on the job, and I remember we had our all staff meeting in the cafeteria, and then it broke out into teams, and certain teams had to select their team leaders because the previous team leader's time was up, and I'm popping in on the teams that were under me because at the time I was over grades 10 through 12, and one of the things I promised the teachers, if you had a discipline issue with the kid, I promise you I'm not going to send the kid back to class with a lollipop and a sticker.
Guilty. I am guilty right there. They just be needing a snack, Dwayne. Dang.
I wanted the teachers to know at the time, I am going to have your back. And so there have been instances since I've been an assistant principal where the kid gets to my office and I felt like the issue was minor enough where it didn't need to come to administration. And so sometimes though, and I learned real quick, sometimes I don't have all the details because the teacher in the classroom sometimes doesn't have time to fill out all the details in the form. So I learned pretty quickly, okay, don't make a snap judgment. So what I did, and I did this as much for the teacher as I did for the student, I said, okay, I'm not going to send you back to this teacher's class today. So if there's only a few minutes left in the class, you sit here, wait in my office. You need to wait in the ISS room. And I'm explaining to the young man, don't see this as a punishment. We call it ISS, and we're actually changing the name and the culture surrounding in-school suspension. So we're calling it ALC, Alternative Learning Center. And even before that, I'm explaining to the student, this is just an alternative place for you to get work done for this bill. I'm not going to set you up
Yeah.
for failure by sending you back to the same class with the same teacher that you're bumping heads with. And in the event that it is you, and I just don't have all the details, I'm not going to set this teacher up for failure by sending you back to his or her class. Apparently, y'all need a break from each other. And so that's how I explained it to the student. Now, if I get word that, you know, it's there's something with this teacher, then there's some conversations that need to be had with the teacher after the fact. And sometimes, you know, I've had to pull a parent in, had the teacher, had the student, and we get down to the bottom of it because, you know, everybody has their story. And, you know, in some cases it is the student. In some cases it's the teacher and their practices. But that's pretty much how I've handled it.
So you can talk real on King Talk. Is that difficult sometimes? Is that hard when you know? I mean, I know sometimes like we get calls for a kid to be removed from class, and it's like 7:52. Like, well, what did they? Ain't no way in the world they ain't been in the room long enough to do anything. Like, and then you talk to them, and you're like, you know, what's going on this morning? Well, my mama cussed me out. My daddy slapped my mama. I ain't get here enough time to get breakfast. And, like,
and there's the rub right there. That has been the case in some instances, but you know, where I might have had the time to ask that question or those questions and get those answers, the teacher who's trying to get class started, you know, their focus is that, and so they might not be thinking bigger picture with this particular kid if they're looking at 29, 30 other kids in that moment. And so in that instance, okay, I might get a teacher a pass. Okay, this is a misunderstanding. But, you know, when you got repeated incidents, you know, maybe it's the same teacher and the same student or the same teacher with several students, then you got to start asking some questions.
Yeah. And I think that we have to be unafraid to ask those questions and have those tough conversations. And that's the great thing, you know, in my role at Forever Kings is that I kind of get to be the bad cop at the table and sit in meetings and say, well, you know, is there another opportunity? So I think as educators, being able to refer families to have those advocates and have those voices, because there's so many times where I'd be like, I just want to tell this mama that this is what you need to do, right? So it's hard for us as brothers sometimes because it's just a fine line. So Mr. Lewis, Antoine, what do you see kind of the challenge with that, supporting your teacher, believing in that young man, all of that goes along with that?
Well, let me start by saying I agree with Dwayne. And teachers are under a lot of stress. You know, you got test scores, you got to do this, and it's almost like there's always layers. And so I do understand the anxiety some have, the stress level some have. But and I believe there's a teachable moment in everything. So when I get kids who, whether it's big or small, they get sent down from a teacher, you know, I kind of talk to them about, hey, now how can we handle this differently? Even if the teacher was wrong, right? Well, I'll address that, but then I ask them this question. If the teacher's wrong, who should address the teacher, right? And so that's when we get to me and your parent will discuss that behind closed doors, not with you in a room, but we will talk to them and we will get to the bottom of that part. But it's not your place to go in there and cuss out a teacher and then because now you look like the bad guy. Yes, sir.
Great point. If you missed it last week, Michael Johnson talked about this. He talked about how that's so true, and I 100% agree with you, and I teach that same thing, but so many kids who have traumatic experiences don't have that trust in their parent, don't trust that their parent is actually going to have their back, or that they're going to come to the school and advocate for them, or they're going to. So I think that that's an interesting perspective, but I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. And I would also say, I mean, I think, and I hope I'm not speaking, you know, out of turn here, but I think I've helped to develop an environment and a culture where I would say 99% of my parents and kids trust me, or some adult in that building to advocate for them.
Yeah, that's
If that
wonderful.
is the case. But I tell the teachers all the time, if you talk to my son, now my son goes to my school, but I'm like, if you talk to my son the way you talk to that kid, yeah, we would have an issue, right? Because you can't talk to kids any kind of way and expect them not to say anything back. So we just hold everybody accountable and just make sure, hey, talk to them like a person, and they in turn will treat you with respect, and we'll get to the bottom of what the issue is. But like you guys were saying, a lot of times there's some needs that are missing. They're hungry,
Yeah.
they're homeless, there's some kind of trauma going on in their lives, and that's why they're doing that. So we always try to, hey, you try to get to the bottom of what's going on.
Yeah, thank you so much for that pivot question. So just two more questions and then we'll wrap up for tonight. So nationally, we know that only 2%, so I will say that again, nationally, not state, nationally, only 2% of every educator represented is a Black male. How does that affect Black male students? I know we kind of talked about it and just not having that visibility, but just anything to add about that and how that affects our young men, not only seeing, not even being able to see necessarily a Black woman, like that's slim. I don't know the data surrounding that, but then a Black male, 2%. So they got like a slim to none chance of ever having a Black male educator. Anybody want to jump in? And
I didn't. Oh,
Go ahead,
go
so.
ahead. Oh, well, I didn't have my a Black male teacher. I don't think until I want to say ninth grade. So I mean, there's something to be said about having people that look like you in positions of authority.
Yeah.
Just, I mean, not even just a teacher, but just like in all facets of life, all jobs. But but having that person to just kind of lean on to support you. That's why you hear, when you talk to a lot of athletes and they talk about people who influence them, they lean back to that coach in high school and most of the time it was a Black coach, or those are the people that were in positions of authority that really had an effect on them because they looked like them and they felt like these people just really had their back. We all know there's certain things that we can say to young Black men that other people can't say to them in those situations, to calm them down, to get them back on track, chastise them a little bit, love on them a little bit. I mean, it's just different coming from a Black male than, others.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Good thoughts. Dwayne?
It is. I really thought about this in talking to my oldest son. And here's the effect that I think it had. I asked my oldest son, is there anyone, and he attends St. X. And so I said, is there any adult at the school that you feel you can confide in, that if there's something personal or, that you can go to. And he mentioned to me that, among his teachers, and I'm not trying to say anything bad about St. X, but he just mentioned among his teachers that relationship wasn't there. But, then he did say, okay, well, maybe he mentioned a coach. Now him being athletically minded, that didn't surprise me, but I needed to know that there was somebody that he connected with.
Yeah.
And so what it says about our young Black men in school, with only there being 2% of the teachers being Black men, is that many of our Black males don't have that person that they have that connection with. And so that might explain a whole lot about their academic shortcomings.
Yeah, and you are leading right into it, Mr. Du Bois. I'm so glad you brought that up. And I just want to, because I have a personal relationship with you, I want to speak to, I appreciate and I applaud men, Black men who are okay with their son having that connection and having that relationship with somebody that's not them. We talked about that last week, how that's okay. That if it's a trusted adult, especially one that you know, if it's a coach, a mentor, a youth pastor, I have a great appreciation for all of the men who have a son in my program, because that shows that they value that I'm not the only influencer my son. And there might be things that, I'll use your kids for example, that Gabe may talk to me about, Dwayne, that he doesn't know how to even approach that conversation with you, right? Not that you're not there, doesn't want to. So I just want to salute you and salute all of the other Black men that are okay with another man having that, being that an additional positive influence in their life. And I'm glad that you spoke to that being important.
Absolutely. It does take a village. It absolutely does take a village.
Mr. Lewis, did you have anything to add?
No, they said pretty much everything. Luckily for me, I have let's see, 4, 5 Black men in my building. It's pretty cool just being able to have people everywhere, and I kind of lean on them for different things. But yeah, 2% is hard because there's no one to really get that relationship with someone. I can think of some of my kids who we would consider troubled. We bumped heads at first. I mean, we bumped, but I mean now I can now say they love me. They look at me almost like another one of their key figures in their lives. But we formed that relationship. So I just think it's important that more of us can get out there in the education field, just to make sure that our kids have someone to they can count on.
Yeah. So Dwayne, you kind of created a segue into our last question. So Black boy achievement. So we know anyone who says that this is untrue is living under a rock, right?
Right.
That there is an achievement gap for students of color, but then it even goes further into males. So males perform at the lowest rate. African American males perform at the lowest rates of every type of student in the nation. So that's incredibly alarming. So let's kind of have a conversation as we close tonight about the achievement gap, the school to prison pipeline, all of those things. So some research that we found at Forever Kings was that nationally only 49%, so less than half of every African American young man reads at a proficient level. 49%. That's disturbing. That should keep people up at night. That they don't even have the basic function of reading. More than half of them. I mean, I don't care if it's just 1%. Like that's still more. And
Right.
We know, Lorenzo, you'll be able to contribute from the aspect of, we know that Black boys are over-identified in special ed, and we know that they just got it rough in education. So let's, as we close tonight, let's talk about Black boys and achievement. What are the challenges? What do we do about it? As y'all can see, I just got real passionate about that because it's not okay. And I think that until as a nation we look at it as not okay, I don't know that it'll change. When you hear that more than half of every African American young boy can't read,
yeah,
I'm talking about they can't count their money. I'm talking about they can't read at a proficient level. That's disturbing. So whoever kind of wants to start the dialogue about that, we got the school to prison pipeline, the achievement gap, the reading proficiency gap, they got a list. It's sad that we spending this much time even naming all of the strikes in the educational setting that are against young men.
Yeah.
So I'll open the floor up. I don't know if Lorenzo, you want to go first as an intervention specialist. I would definitely love to hear from you.
I think it's important to, we have to find interests. It's important to really hone in on a kid's interest and then build kind of curriculum and reading material around those interests. So things that interest them, they're going to be more apt to read in their free time, outside of the school setting, things like that. And then also, I touched on it earlier, we just got to reshape what education looks like for our young men. So some of the data is probably skewed just because of, like you said, over identification. And then I know the principals can kind of talk about, we just kind of pass kids along after we identify them. So we're not setting them up. There's no authentic success ever been had for this student in their life inside of a school building. And then they just totally get passed on. And then that's why we run into a prison pipeline, because what have they been successful as all their years in school? They can't pinpoint one thing that they've been successful at to lean on to kind of, earn money in adulthood that leads to possible criminal activity. But we just got to create those authentic, just real success for those young men in school so that they can kind of pinpoint what they're good at and they can build on that into adulthood.
I think everything you said is so great. If we could hire you at Forever Kings, I would fight Laura Mason for you. That's so good. I'm like about to jump out my seat. I think that's so good. The first thing I want to comment on is that you said they never experienced success. I say that all the time. You have to let young men of color experience some victory. I think it was every child, but I definitely think let them score the touchdown even if they didn't make it. Like we have at my school, we do dojo parties, and I know most recently, right before we're on our extended summer break now that you can call it, we had kids that grew 30-40% in positive behavior, but still didn't meet the goal. Why don't they get the reward? They grew 40% and that's not good enough. Right. And I think that can jerk. So next month, you think they're going to try to get it again? Wrong. So I think that we absolutely have to let them experience that victory. I also think, to your point, that, and you can speak to this as an intervention specialist, and we have one on our board that really helps me fine tune stuff like this. I think that we have let IEPs and 504s and ODD and everything under the sun be a cripple. I think for some students it's absolutely necessary, but I think it's a cripple. And I tell kids all the time that IEP don't mean nothing when you leave this school.
Yep.
No boss. If you come work for me, I ain't trying to hear nothing about that IEP. I expect for you to do X, Y, Z, ABC. And I think manifestations of a disability has just made it's destroying our kids, especially our young men.
Man, you just hit it right on. I told kids when I was at Withrow all the time, and I tell them, at Pleasant Hill, in school is the last time you're gonna hear someone concerned about what your IEP says.
Yeah.
In a nutshell. After that, it means absolutely nothing. Colleges are recognizing a little bit now, but they weren't, they didn't care about your IEP.
They don't care for real, send that check. That's what they care about.
Exactly. So you're right, man. In so many instances, it has become a crutch. It kind of became a way to just pass kids along, for lack of a better, explanation.
And I think it becomes an excuse for behavior. Like many kids get away with stuff that and administrators, you can speak to this, like you can pretty much do anything but burn the building down and come back to school. That's crazy. If you have an IEP, that's crazy. And then they go outside and they have that mentality that, I can do whatever I want and ain't nothing gonna happen because I got this little thing and I don't even really understand what it is for real in real life, right? And then you go to jail because they don't care. So I think that contributes a lot to the school to prison pipeline, is like that lack of accountability, because they can literally we had a little third grader, and Antoine, you can speak to this, the law surrounding elementary students, like you can punch the principal in the eye and come back to school. That's crazy. That is foolishness. And I'm not saying that suspension or expulsion is the proper solution, but at the same time, we should stop putting people in jail, So it's just, I do think that we have to find creative solutions to discipline, or we are just setting kids, especially young men, up to fail. And the last thing I want to comment on that you said was find interest and build a curriculum around it, we see that and we see how effective it is. And I think we're able to do it a lot more because we don't have those restraints of being in a classroom setting.
Yeah.
So we can read books by Jason Rendell. It's a Black
Mhm.
author who, writes books about gangs. And our very first activity that we do with all of our programs is we had the kids listen to Juicy by Biggie, right? It was all
Right,
a dream, right? And they don't realize that they're doing a lyric analysis to the
Yeah.
lyrics, and then they create their own dream for their life. That's
Mhm.
learning.
Right. Yeah.
Right? That's a lyric analysis. It's just about something that it was all a dream. I used to, right? So they
Yeah.
end up bopping and they writing. That's learning. So I think that's great. We crunch for time, so I'm gonna let Dwayne go. Mr. Lorenzo, we got a job for you though. I'm gonna let you go, Mr. Du Bois. Achievement gap, school to prison pipeline, all of those things. What are your takes on it? What do we do?
All right, I try to get it all in. Now, I don't want to monopolize the time, but here's something that I'm thinking. When it comes to reading, at the younger ages, students are learning to read, but then when they get to what the level where I'm working, they're reading to learn. Well, if they've never learned to read at a proficient level, all the learning falls apart at every subject area, because many teachers are assigning that reading as part of their background work before the kids come to the classroom to get supposedly in depth. But the kids can't do that background work outside of class because their reading comprehension is not on par. And so there's no quick fix to this. And earlier I said it does take a village, and it's the same thing with respect to this. It does start in the home with the parents, and I don't mean to put blame on parents or anything, but I say that is because parents are the first teachers. And so it's important to read to your children even at a young age, to have books in your home, and as Lorenzo said, have them reading when they are able to read on subjects that interest them. And so there are experts out there that don't care if it's comic books, it's still reading.
It's still
So I believe also not to allow students too much time on electronic devices at an early age. I heard that the developers of these electronic devices, iPads, cell phones, and things like that, they don't let their kids touch them. But a lot of times we have our kids on them to keep them occupied.
Yeah. You're talking good, Pastor.
So having them occupied with books instead of electronic devices at an early age could go a long way. But my wife being an English teacher also, I became familiar with Audible several years back. And so for those kids, who are struggling with reading, being able to have those headsets on and having the book read as you read along, and that's helped my oldest son. His reading comprehension is fine, but he reads kind of slowly.
Yeah.
And so, but these are things to help, with the whole learning piece and the achievement piece, that I think, but that school to prison pipeline, that's something else, and I just believe it's going to need to be all hands on deck. In the school buildings, we need to be what we want to see, and so we want to see more of our kids successful. Well, there needs to be more of us, so that the kids can see people in positions of authority, that look like them. And too many times we send a message that the only way that you can be successful is to become a ball player or a rapper, some students may excel in that, but I got a better chance of walking outside my door and getting struck by lightning than I do of making it to the NFL. Now, I'm not one to crush any kids' hopes and dreams. If that's what you want, willing to work for it, then go work for it. But, we need to show our kids examples of people who are successful in a plethora of fields.
They
Because
can't be what they can't see.
they can't, exactly. So we don't show them engineers, well, enough of them. People who went to trade school and got credentialed and are making a good living, who are able to take their families on vacations. Our kids need to see those things and know that they're viable options.
Yeah, that's so good. Mr. Lewis, talk to us. Anything to add? So you are you're creating that foundation at your level. As Dwayne said, that at your level they're learning to read to hopefully be able to learn to read to learn, right, in high school and beyond. So what does that kind of look like for you?
Wow, Lorenzo and Dwayne, you guys knocked it out. Where I'm standing, we actually kind of flipped that switch to reading to learn in the second grade, definitely third grade before that test. I was just kind of thinking, oftentimes in elementary, we've always waited till they got to third grade. Now they got a reading specialist. They got 2 intervention specialists. They got 12 tutors on the team. And so it's like all this help, and then they get the fourth grade
We
and they
sending them to every after school program. We finding transportation. We doing it all in third grade. Like, well, wait,
Yeah.
hold on.
in fourth grade they struggle.
Yeah.
So what I did was I got to think of, I tell my staff, I'm not worried about hitting the scores right now, but we got to make sure every kid is growing. And so we started kindergarten, and we just want to make sure we can start getting that foundation right. And as they grow, we'll eventually get there, but you just want to make sure that you're celebrating that success, celebrating that growth. And like you said, you want to make sure that they're reading something of interest.
Yeah.
My son, I think a lot of problems with black boys, they can't sit still. That's why they don't like reading, right? So if you give them a book about, I don't know,
Gangs and violence, A Long Way Down by Jason Riddell talks about this dude who murders somebody on each floor. Like that's real.
But they need something that's going to interest them. If you get something about, I don't know, Little House on the Prairie, they don't care about that, right? So they're gonna be like, well, I'm not reading, and they're sitting in school like whatever, right? So you want to make sure they have stuff that interests them. We got, like, my son, to get him to read, we had to get him sports books. He's reading about Michael Jordan, Derek Jeter, Bo Jackson, Babe Ruth, just to get him, reading, because that's what interests him. So that's what we had to do. And that school to prison pipeline, it's so multi-layered for me.
Yeah.
But I think, one, you need some parents to advocate for their kids. We don't see enough of that. But like you said, some of this behavior is downright criminal at a young age. And I think it's very important. I tell my parents, please get your kid in preschool at 3 and 4 years old, because that's half the battle. If they can't read when they get to kindergarten, you know what? I got the bomb staff. They will be reading by the time they leave. But if they can't socially interact healthily with kids and adults, that's the problem. And then, unfortunately, sometimes we see parents that come up there and they want to blame us. My kid don't do this at school. They don't do this at home. It's a school.
I bet they ain't saying that no more. Y'all homeschooling them suckers. I bet that has changed. There has been a shift. The Lord said, I got a trick for y'all.
Oh, man. But it's so much, man. And I know because our families go through so much trauma, we're afraid of the mental health partners that come into the building. And so they want to kind of stay away from that. And so all these things we try to do to help the kids, and they, it's a lot. And I know we don't have time to get into it. That can be its own show, I'm sure. We can come back and talk about that for 3 hours.
3 to 5 hours.
Well, I want to get started because we got to get out of here.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Such a healthy, important conversation. I wish we had more time. There are so many things that we could keep talking about. So many layers to this thing, so many things that we think are one thing, that they're actually another. So many, but we do want to honor everybody's time. I appreciate you, fellas. If you have any questions for any of these gentlemen, feel free to email me at info@foreverkingsincorporated.org, and I can forward that message to them. I'm sure they would be glad to answer that for you. Thank you so much for joining King Talk tonight. I'm Jordan Bankson, the founder and chief impact officer. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.